Of course, Shavuos and a unique calendar situation, sort of unique, doesn't happen that often, where here in Eretz Yisrael, Friday is Yom Tov, and then Erev Shabbos. Friday is Erev Shabbos and Yom Tov, and so people are asking or even assuming that they can make, whether they can make Shabbos early next Friday, meaning it's Yom Tov. People like to make Shabbos early, understandably, because children and all that, especially after an exhausting night of Shavuos for many people. So the question is, can you make Shabbos early next Friday afternoon after Plag HaMincha, as many people do every week? So, let me note that according to many Poskim, making Shabbos early in general is encouraged. It could be a good thing because you're being moishef michol kodesh. You're making Tosefes Shabbos is a mitzvah. So one could say it's a good thing, but is it the right thing here? So it's just a little bit of history here that in Chicago, in the years ago, I think it was around in the 50s, late 50s. So the question came up about making Shabbos early, exactly this case. It was on Shavuos or Rosh Hashanah, but it was exactly this question, and that was a time where all the Rabbanim of Chicago got together, and they said, let's allow it. Let's allow it. And the reason to allow it is because they thought it was a good tikkun, a good takana for the city. Because here's the thing, just hear me out for a second. That you're allowed to make an Eruv Tavshilin. This year you should make an Eruv Tavshilin, and you cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos. But and that's an Eruv Tavshilin. But you're not allowed to do so in the Shah HaKroiva to Shabbos. So says the Mishna Berura, an hour. You should wait an hour. Meaning the whole idea is that you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov. Who knows? Maybe guests are going to come, and all that. But if it's a few minutes before Shabbos, then you're not allowed to cook, and that's straight hachana from Yom Tov to Shabbos. You're not allowed to do it. So the Rabbanim of Chicago said, "Okay, here's a good idea. Let everybody make Shabbos early. So it's Shabbos. That's all. It's Shabbos, and nobody's cooking from Yom Tov to Shabbos. Nobody's doing that. And they made Shabbos early. The Poskim of America at that time wrote books about this. It was not a simple thing at all. And most were against it. In other words, they saw it as a kind of a hayrashah. That's what the Rabbanim decided. But you're not supposed to do it. And there's many reasons not to do it. There's one reason to do it. The one reason to do it is because if you look in Hilchos Eruv Tavshilin, the Magen Avraham says that there's a hakdama, and the Magen Avraham says this as a side thing. It's not even what he's talking about. He writes here at the end, "V'lachein noagu." There's a minhag she'shchal yontiv be'erev Shabbos makdimim lehispalel arvis. This is a sentence in the Magen Avraham, which is used as the makor that you can make Shabbos early on the cheshbon of yontiv, if you will. The Poskim are quick to point out that that's not what the Magen Avraham says. The most he says is that you're allowed to daven early. It doesn't mean, which is a chiddush unto itself, it doesn't mean that you're allowed to, like, mamish do Kedushas Shabbos. What could be wrong with making Kedushas Shabbos? Well, first of all, what do you say in Kiddush? How do you daven? Second of all, loy matzinu, that you can do such a thing, that take one kedusha and change it into a different type of kedusha. It was Kedushas Yom Tov, and you're turning it into Kedushas Shabbos. You can make it into Tosefes Shabbos, maybe, because that's what you do when you light the candles 20 minutes before Yom Tov. But there's a whole, which I'd actually like to go into more, but there's a whole list of very interesting reasons why you can't do it. Here in this Kehilla, we're not going to do it. It's it's a very, very lenient psak to say. There may be other communities that are doing that if you're looking for that, but it would be a very lenient psak to say that you can make Shabbos early next Friday. So we won't do it, but this is the main historic topic, not something that's mefurish in Shulchan Aruch, it's not something that's mefurish in Chazal, and it's not mefurish in the Mishna Berura. This is diyukim from late Rabbanim as to whether this can be done on a year like this. I want to just finish off what I started talking about yesterday. conclude the topic. We were talking about whether it is permissible to make an early Shabbos when it's Shavuos, when it's Yom Tov. That's this year. The Friday is Yom Tov of Shavuos, and some people make early Shabbos every week, which is fine as long as you do it right. But they want to do the same thing for the same reason on Shavuos and make Shabbos early. And it's not at all as simple. There's a sefer called Or Olam by one of the great rabbanim of America, Reb Blumenfeld. I don't know if everyone heard of him. He didn't write a lot. The great Mir, Talmud from Mir in Europe, in Big London. Everyone admired him in Newark, New Jersey. And he wrote an entire tshuva about this, which was pretty miskabel by everyone. I heard Moshe also said this is the right thing. But it was in response to a story in Chicago. So the Vada Rabbanim of Chicago early on in the early 50s decided that everybody together should make early Shabbos on a Yom Tov. And the reason is, they said, because they didn't want people to, as the Mishna Berura says, they didn't want people to cook too close to Shabbos for Shabbos. In other words, since the part of the heter is hoyel u'miklei le'orchim, so it might not, you can't, the Mishna Berura I think says 45 minutes or something like that, but it has to be a hafsek. So in Chicago, they made a takana you can do it. That's what the Or Olam was commenting on. And he says, in short, I'm taking a bunch of pages and taking it in a sentence, he says that the whole idea of making Shabbos early all the time, all year, is a limud from psukim, that there's such a thing as Tosefes Shabbos. It would have been Yom Kippur, Erev Ad Erev. There's a whole limud of the Gemara, but that's talking about that you could take chol and make it kodesh. That's the chiddush of the Gemara. The fact that you could take kodesh and make it kodesh, and not only that, make a higher kedusha and really make it a lower kedusha, because in many areas you see Kedushas Yom Tov is the Onshim and all kinds of things. You see Kedushas Yom Tov is even a stronger kedusha than Shabbos. So behechatesa, you could be nachis darga and go from Kedushas Yom Tov to Kedushas Shabbos. That's what he says. An interesting thing. He published a sefer and he sent a copy to the Kloisenberger Rebbe, the Tzadik Levracha. And the Kloisenberger Rebbe looked at the sefer and he wrote it back, which was printed in the new edition of the sefer. He wrote it back, says, I'm so glad you brought this up, because when he was in the concentration camp, everybody wanted to make, I'm trying to wrap my head around the Matthias, but everybody wanted to make Shabbos early on Shavuos, for whatever reason, Jews. They wanted to make Shabbos early on Shavuos, and they asked him if they could do it or not, and he said, Kibuvan, I didn't have any Sfarim with me, and I didn't know how to research this or how to think about it, so I didn't know. And Ada Yom Hazeh, said the Kloisenberger Rebbe, until years later, he had no idea what the shayla is. So he's so happy that he wrote about it. But the Kloisenberger Rebbe said, what I do remember is that in Hilchos Eruv Tavshilin, the Magen Avraham says exactly this case. That there is a Magen Avraham. It's not the Shulchan Aruch, it's not the Mishna Berura. There's a Magen Avraham which says that there's such a minhag. He says that's what they did in his city. There's such a minhag to daven early. That's the minhag the Magen Avraham says. So you see that you can do it. That's what the Kloisenberger Rebbe said back against this whole tshuva. But others came and they said this is no raya at all. And I'm going into this just for a minute because of the lumdus of it, not because of the it's just an interesting lumdus. They said just because the Magen Avraham says you can daven early, that doesn't mean that you can make Shabbos early. You can daven early. Meaning it doesn't mean that you can make Kiddush, and it doesn't mean you can daven Marv and not say not say Yom Tov. It doesn't benching. It's not so pashut. How do you do benching? You say Alviyava, you don't say Alviyava, so that you can go ahead and take Shabbos. Magen Avraham says you can daven early. That's all he says. So there's a raya that the Gemara says famously that Rav, the great Rav, so he would be Matzah Shel Shabbos Be'erev Shabbos V'Shel Motzei Shabbos B'Shabbos. That's one of the places where we learn you can make Shabbos early, you can daven early. So Rav great Tana, Amor Tana Polik, Rav said that he himself used to daven Shabbos davening on Erev Shabbos. Okay, many people do that. But then he used to daven Motzei Shabbos on Shabbos. Motzei Shabbos on Shabbos. Two things he did. How do you daven Motzei Shabbos on Shabbos? So whatever his reason is, not for now, clearly he didn't say Shabbos is over. He didn't bring in weekday early. That for sure you're not allowed to do. So that and another interesting cheshbon, besides for there's no raya from the Magen Avraham, but the Poskim say that there's oisek b'mitzvah patur b'na mitzvah. So if you're holding chol, it's Friday, and you're makabel a mitzvah, beautiful, kabel Shabbos. If you're doing a mitzvah, which is the mitzvah of Yontiv, so the Rishonim say, the Rambam, the Ritva, they say that when you're doing a mitzvah, not only are you putter from another mitzvah that comes your way, we all know the story of Pruta to Rav Yosef and all, but not only are we putter from the mitzvah that comes our way, it's usher to do the second mitzvah. You can't, even bigger mitzvah, you can't just drop the mitzvah you're doing it because that's a bazayin to the first mitzvah. So here you are keeping Yontiv. So who says you're allowed to go and keep Shabbos? Now, there are many Kehillos that do this. I'm not sure if they do it. Some probably do it, figured it out, and some people just do it because you make Shabbos early. But here we're not going to do that. But it's a very, according to some Poskim, that Oisik b'mitzvah, if you leave the mitzvah of Yontiv and you go into the mitzvah of Shabbos, which is what you're doing, you're just dropping Yontiv completely, that could be an Isser D'Oraisa of being Mavaza Yontiv. Ramosha by Shabbos clocks, he says it could be an Isser D'Oraisa to be Mavaza Yontiv. So much better to stay away from this practice.